Lieutenant Riley Monroe thought she had another rule-breaker at Gate B-17. No uniform, no physical documents, just attitude. Bella Carrington didn't argue, she stood silent, scarred, unbothered. Monroe pushed harder. Then General Rhodes appeared. He didn't speak to Monroe. He saluted Carrington. Captain Carrington, Kandahar hero. They thought she was a civilian. What they didn't know? She led the mission that saved 56 lives. Stick around, because when pride meets truth on camera, the fallout isn't quiet. This wasn't protocol. This was a reckoning. We'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Comment below and subscribe to stay updated. Lieutenant Riley Monroe stood at her post near Gate B-17 at Ramstein Air Base Spine, straight as the polished brass bars on her collar caught the harsh fluorescent lighting. Another entitled civilian trying to board a military transport. She'd seen hundreds like this one. But something about this woman's quiet confidence made Riley's skin prickle with irritation. "Ma'am, as I stated, I need to see your documentation," Riley declared, voice crisp with authority. She watched the woman, Bella Carrington, according to the boarding pass, maintain perfect military bearing despite wearing civilian clothes. The growing crowd of actual service members began pulling out phones, their whispers rising like static. "I have verified veteran status," Carrington replied evenly. "My electronic credentials are already in the system." Riley's fingers tightened around her badge holder. "Electronic credentials can be falsified. Without proper physical documentation, I cannot allow you to board. This is a military transport, not a civilian flight." She stepped closer, using her height advantage. "I've dealt with countless wannabes trying to game the system. Protocol exists for a reason." The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Phone cameras clicked. Riley felt a flash of satisfaction. Let them record her doing her job. She'd built her reputation on being unflinching about regulations. "Last warning," Riley announced. "Clear the boarding area, or I'll have you escorted out." That's when Carrington slowly removed her jacket. The movement was deliberate, practiced. A long, jagged scar ran down her right arm from shoulder to elbow, tissue puckered and pale against tan skin. Riley's throat went dry as her eyes caught other marks, smaller scars, the kind that came from shrapnel. "Lieutenant Monroe." A commanding voice cut through the tension. Riley's spine snapped even straighter as General Rhodes strode through the parting crowd. But instead of addressing her, he stopped in front of Carrington and raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Captain Carrington, good to see you again. That last op in Kandahar was outstanding work." Riley's stomach plummeted as Carrington returned the salute. "Captain, Kandahar." The pieces clicked into horrible place. This wasn't some civilian trying to scam a ride. This was decorated Special Forces Captain Bella Carrington, whose classified rescue mission had made quiet waves through command circles last month. "Sir." Riley started, but her voice cracked. Already she could see Sontuachar vet respect trending on phones in the crowd. Her career built on unwavering adherence to protocol suddenly felt like a house of cards. "I believe the captain's credentials are in order," General Rhodes said mildly. "Wouldn't you agree, Lieutenant?" Riley's badge felt like it was burning against her chest. "Yes, sir. My apologies, Captain." As Carrington boarded with quiet dignity, Riley caught her reflection in the window. Ramrod straight posture, gleaming brass bars, and utterly blind pride. The weight of her mistake settled like lead in her stomach. This night would haunt her, she knew. But it was only the beginning. Type blind pride in the comments if you've ever had your certainty shattered in a single moment. Lieutenant Riley Monroe's fingers traced the brass bars on her collar, their once comforting weight now a mockery as she watched the security footage for the 20th time. Her own voice, sharp and dismissive, crackled through her office speakers. "Protocol is protocol regardless of your claimed status." The way she'd emphasized claimed made her stomach turn now. 12 messages from command blinked on her phone, each one making her brass bars feel heavier. The security footage played on loop across her monitor, her rigid posture, the mechanical recitation of regulations, while Bella Carrington stood with that insufferable calm. The Fortjet Respect hashtag had exploded across military channels, each notification like a personal indictment. "Lieutenant Monroe, your 1400 briefing." Her assistant's voice trailed off at the door. Monroe waved her away, eyes fixed on the screen, where her past self performed the perfect military puppet show. She'd learned this dance early in her career. Stand straight, quote. Regulations maintain control. But now watching herself block a decorated war hero from simply entering the base she'd bled to defend, Monroe saw something darker. An old memory surfaced her first day at the academy, another female officer blocking her path, demanding extra verification. "Protocol?" That officer had said, while male cadets streamed past unchallenged. Monroe had sworn she'd never become that person yet. Here she was, the very image of what she'd despised. The brass bars caught the afternoon light, throwing shadows across her desk. Monroe opened her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Research was her refuge, her way of making sense of chaos. Articles about institutional bias in military leadership filled her screen, studies showing how female officers often overcompensated with rigid protocol enforcement, especially toward other women. Each word felt like a personal accusation. "Lieutenant Monroe." Her commanding officer's voice cut through her speakers. "We need to discuss the Carrington situation." The video call window opened, revealing Colonel Harrison's grave expression. "This isn't just about today. We've received reports of similar incidents." Monroe's throat tightened. "Similar incidents, sir? 3 complaints in the past month alone, all involving female veterans or service members, all citing excessive protocol enforcement." Harrison's words hung in the air like smoke. "What's really going on here, Riley?" The question hit like a physical blow. Monroe's mind raced to Captain Sarah Chen, her mentor at the academy, who'd praised her attention to protocol while subtly encouraging this rigid enforcement. "It's about maintaining standards," Chen had said, but now Monroe wondered whose standards they'd been protecting. Her phone buzzed again, another viral clip, this time from a different angle. The comments scrolled past, "Power trip much. This is what's wrong with the system. Who hurt her?" Each word chipped away at the carefully constructed facade of Lieutenant Riley Monroe, revealing the frightened cadet who'd once stood on the other side of that barrier. Type "reflect" if you've ever become what you fought against flashed across her screen, the engagement prompt feeling like a personal challenge. Monroe's hands shook as she pulled up her service record. Commendations, promotions, each achievement built on a foundation of rigid protocol enforcement. How many others had she turned away? How many times had she hidden behind regulations to avoid facing her own biases? The brass bars caught her eye again, and she remembered polishing them that morning, proud of their shine. Now they felt like weights pulling her down into a system she'd helped perpetuate. The security footage played on, showing Carrington's quiet dignity in the face of Monroe's bureaucratic barrier. In that moment, Lieutenant Riley Monroe realized she hadn't been protecting protocol. She'd been protecting her own fragile sense of authority, earned through years of becoming exactly what she'd once fought against. The hashtag #VetRespect continued to trend, each notification a reminder that sometimes the greatest threat to progress wasn't external opposition, but the barriers we build within ourselves, justified by protocol and powered by fear. Lieutenant Riley Monroe's shoulders tensed as another whisper rippled through the mess hall. The brass bars on her collar felt heavier than ever, each gleam a mockery of the authority she'd wielded so confidently mere hours ago. 6 hours since the video had exploded across military channels, and already her carefully constructed world was fracturing. The quiet buzz of her phone made her flinch. Another notification. The hashtag #Monroe mistake had reached over 2 million impressions. CNN was running the footage on loop. Her rigid stance, her finger jabbing at Bella Carrington's chest, the thunderous silence when Carrington's service record was revealed. Monroe's own voice, sharp with misplaced authority, echoed in her ears. Proper documentation or no entry. Those are the rules. Rules. They had been her shield, her justification. Now they felt like chains dragging her down. Monroe's fingers traced the edge of her desk calendar, still marked with the meticulous notes she'd made about base security protocols. The same protocols that had become her obsession while Carrington had been leading rescue missions in Fallujah. "Lieutenant." A junior officer appeared at her door, hesitation clear in his stance. "Command wants to see you at 1400 hours. They're reviewing the incident." Monroe nodded stiffly, watching him retreat. She didn't miss how he avoided her eyes, how quickly he fled her presence. The office that had been her sanctuary now felt like a cage, each tick of the wall clock counting down to her inevitable reckoning. Opening her laptop was a mistake. The video had gone viral on every platform. 3 million views on YouTube. 5 million on Twitter. Each share, each comment, each angry reaction stripped away another layer of her carefully maintained control. Her mouse hovered over the footage, and against her better judgment, she clicked play. The security camera angle was merciless. It captured every second of her confrontation with Carrington. The war hero's quiet dignity against Monroe's bureaucratic inflexibility. But it was the background details that devastated her now, the young airman's shocked expression, the visiting general's raised eyebrow, the way her own posture radiated arrogance rather than authority. 56 lives, Monroe whispered to herself, the number burning in her throat. While she'd been polishing her bars and enforcing arbitrary protocols, Carrington had saved 56 souls under heavy fire. The contrast was devastating. A sharp rap at her door made her jump. Colonel Harrison stood there, his expression grave. "The Secretary of the Air Force has seen the footage, Lieutenant. This isn't just a base incident anymore." Monroe's stomach lurched. She'd built her career on being untouchable, unquestionable. Now each ring of her phone, each email notification carried the potential for destruction. The security cameras that had been her allies now felt like accusers, their lenses capturing every nervous twitch, every moment of growing panic. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was worse. A compilation video juxtaposing her confrontation with Carrington against footage from Fallujah. The hero versus the bureaucrat. Service versus obstruction. The comments were brutal, each one a nail in her professional coffin. "Have you watched the interview?" Colonel Harrison asked softly. "Carrington's interview about the incident." Monroe shook her head, but reached for her phone. There it was. Carrington, composed and dignified, speaking not with anger, but with disappointment. "The military is about service, about putting others before ourselves. Sometimes we forget that behind every rule there's a person. Behind every protocol there's a purpose." The words hit Monroe like physical blows. She looked at her reflection in the window, the perfect uniform, the gleaming brass, the rigid posture, and saw what everyone else now saw, a person who had mistaken protocol for purpose, regulation for righteousness. The base loudspeaker crackled to life, announcing afternoon formations. Monroe stood adjusting her uniform out of habit, but as she stepped into the corridor, the usual respectful nods were absent. Instead, phones appeared recording her walk of shame. Each step echoed with the weight of her spectacular misjudgment. Type protocol in the comments if you've ever seen power corrupt someone's judgment. The security camera at the end of the hall blinked its red light, another unblinking witness to her downfall. Tomorrow she would face command. Tomorrow she would answer for her choices. But tonight, in the crushing solitude of her office, Lieutenant Riley Monroe finally understood she had become exactly what she'd sworn to fight against, an obstacle to true service, a barrier rather than a bridge. The brass bars on her collar caught the setting sun flashing like a warning signal. Too late she realized that while she'd been guarding gates, real heroes had been storming them to save lives. Lieutenant Riley Monroe's footsteps echoed through the sleek corridors of the forge, each step heavier than the last. The familiar weight of my brass bars, usually proudly displayed on my uniform, felt like lead in their velvet case. I'd deliberately left them behind today, a small act of surrender that spoke volumes. Through the glass walls, I watched teams of service members training together their rank insignias, meaningless in this space. A corporal confidently guided a colonel through a tactical simulation. A sergeant major took notes from a specialist's presentation. This fluid hierarchy made my strict base protocols seem absurdly outdated. Lieutenant Monroe. Bella Carrington's voice carried across the facility, strong and clear, just as it had been that day at the gate. But this time, instead of defiance, I felt something else: respect. Phones emerged immediately. Of course they did. The lieutenant who'd tried to block a decorated war hero was now walking into her domain. Monroe Meets started trending within minutes. But unlike that first viral moment, I didn't try to shut the cameras down. Let them record. Let them see. "I appreciate you coming," Carrington said, gesturing to a training area where a diverse group of service members worked seamlessly together. "Would you like to observe?" My throat tightened. "I came to do more than observe, ma'am. I came to learn." The words scraped against my pride, but they needed to be said. In the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. Ramrod straight posture, perfectly pressed uniform, but something was different. The arrogance was gone. "Your program here?" I gestured to the facility, to the merit-based training happening all around us. "This is what real leadership looks like, isn't it? Not barriers, not protocols, just excellence." Carrington nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "The Forge welcomes everyone who's willing to learn, Lieutenant, even those who once stood in its way." The irony wasn't lost on me. The very woman I'd tried to block was now opening doors I never knew existed. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my phone, pulling up that damning viral video from the gate incident. "I'd like to make a statement," I said, looking directly into the nearest camera. "About that day, about what I've learned about what real service means. Type transform if you've ever had to admit you were wrong to become better." My voice grew stronger as I continued. "I was so focused on maintaining order that I forgot our true mission to build stronger warriors regardless of their background or appearance. Bella Carrington didn't just challenge my authority that day. She challenged my entire worldview. The training around us continued a living testament to what I'd been fighting against. A female Muslim sergeant demonstrated advanced combat techniques. A transgender corporal led a strategic planning session. This wasn't chaos, as I'd feared. This was strength through diversity. I'm requesting a permanent transfer to the Forge." I announced both to Carrington and to the still recording phones. Not as an authority figure, but as a student. Because true leadership means being willing to learn even when, especially when, it challenges everything you thought you knew. Carrington extended her hand. "Welcome to the Forge, Lieutenant Monroe. Leave your brass bars in that case. Here we measure worth by actions, not symbols." As I shook her hand, my phone buzzed with notifications. Monroe Transforms was trending now, alongside clips of my admission. But for the first time since this whole controversy began, I didn't care about the viral spread. I cared about the truth it carried. Looking around at the diverse faces of America's military working together, I finally understood. Sometimes the strongest stand you can take is admitting you need to change. Share this moment if you believe true strength lies in the courage to transform. The brass bars in their case would serve as my reminder, not of the authority I'd once clutched so tightly, but of the day I learned that real power comes from growth, not control. My journey from barrier to bridge had begun. Lieutenant Riley Monroe stares at her reflection in the mirror of her quarters, her once pristine uniform now feeling like a stranger's costume. The brass bars that had given her such pride sit heavily in her drawer, no longer symbols of authority, but reminders of how terribly wrong she'd been. Her hands shake slightly as she closes the drawer, the soft click echoing with finality. 24 hours ago, she'd stood at those gates drunk on power, trying to deny entry to one of the military's most decorated heroes. Now the viral video of her confrontation with Bella Carrington has garnered millions of views, and Monroe must learn continues to trend. But unlike yesterday's panic today, brings a different kind of ache, the deep, cleansing pain of truth. Lieutenant Riley Monroe walks the grounds of Ramstein Air Base one last time, as an officer, each step heavy with reflection. The morning sun catches on her collar, now bare of its brass bars. Enlisted personnel who once snapped to attention now pass with careful neutrality, their silent judgment more powerful than any reprimand. "I've requested reassignment to the forge." Lieutenant Riley Monroe announces to her commanding officer, her voice steady, despite the turmoil within. The colonel's raised eyebrow speaks volumes. "As a trainee, sir, starting from the bottom." The words that once would have felt like humiliation now taste like hope. Her fingers brush against the empty space where her bars used to rest, a gesture that's become habit over the past day. "Carrington showed me what real leadership looks like," she continues, "and it's not what I've been doing." The viral moment plays again in her mind, her own face contorted with unearned authority, contrasted against Carrington's quiet dignity. The video that could have destroyed her career instead became her salvation, forcing Lieutenant Riley Monroe to confront the ugly truth about power and privilege. Walking across the training grounds later that afternoon, she stops to watch new recruits drilling. The rhythmic sound of boots on pavement, that iconic military cadence, strikes her differently now. Each thud reminds her of everything she must unlearn. "Lieutenant Monroe," a voice calls out. It's Carrington approaching with that same quiet confidence that had first triggered Lieutenant Riley Monroe's insecurity. "I heard about your decision. I owe you an apology." Lieutenant Riley Monroe manages her throat tight. "And a thank you." Carrington's small nod carries more weight than any medal. "True service isn't about rank," she says simply. Lieutenant Riley Monroe's eyes burn as she watches Carrington walk away. The words echo in her mind, joining the steady rhythm of marching feet and the weight of empty collar pins. Later, alone in her quarters, Lieutenant Riley Monroe opens her laptop. The hashtag is still trending, but now she types a different message. "To everyone who watched my worst moment go viral, thank you. You helped me find my best self. Starting over at the forge tomorrow, real leadership begins with accountability. Monroe must learn." The post goes live, and Lieutenant Riley Monroe closes her laptop ready to face whatever comes next. Tomorrow she'll be just Trainee Monroe starting from scratch. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she feels truly worthy of the uniform she wears. Drop 1 if you believe in the power of transformation. Have you ever had to start over to grow? Share your story below. The brass bars that once defined Lieutenant Riley Monroe now rest in a display case at the Forge's museum alongside a simple placard. Leadership isn't about power. It's about the courage to change. The case stands as a reminder to every new trainee that true honor sometimes means surrendering the very things we once thought made us strong.